A sampler is an extremely versatile tool. Essentially, it allows you to map digital audio files or samples across pitch ranges for triggering via MIDI. It does this by dramatically changing the playback speed of the samples in real time to match the pitch specified by the MIDI note value. Individual samples are referenced and mapped in sampler instruments. In this lesson, you will explore the abilities of sampling by creating unique sampler instruments. I'm going to begin by importing a normal audio file into this project. So I'm going to go to my browsers. I'm going to navigate my way to the desktop, and I have a loop here which I'm going to listen to. And I'm going to drag that loop into my project. I'm also going to import the BPM information that's with it. It's 97 BPM. And now from the tracks menu, I'm going to choose convert regions to a new sampler track. And in the convert regions to a new sampler track dialog window, you can see how the selected audio region will initially be mapped in the new sampler instrument. So I can either create a region, or I can splice the region up using transient markers. New function in 10.5 is the ability to choose between which instrument you want to load the sampler into. I'm going to load it directly into the sampler, and I'm going to keep the name as loop, and the trigger note range I'm going to change to C1, so the first note appears on C1. And now it says here it's going to create an instrument with 22 zones of a maximum of 92 from 22 selected transient markers, including a MIDI trigger region. Press OK. Let's mute the first loop. Let's have a listen to the new loop and open up the sampler instrument. So the loop's been loaded into the sampler instrument, and if we have a look at our zones, or even go to our mapping, we'll be able to see that the sample has been sliced and mapped across the MIDI keyboard. Like so. And it's also given us a MIDI part that will now trigger each of those samples in accordance to where they are on the keyboard. New way to do this in 10.5. If I delete that now and go back to my audio file, so new in 10.5 is the ability to take the loop and rather import it into the arrange or the tracks area, drag it over to the track header and choose your sampler from here. So I'll go quick sampler. Now you can see the splice points here, so you can see how it's being chopped up. You can edit them, you can move them. So at the moment it's slice transients, so it's analysing each of these transients and slicing the loop. It says that the start key is C1, but you can change that here. And it also says that it's being mapped chromatically on the keyboard. Like so. If you wanted to use just the white keys, you can, or just the black keys. You can see there that it tells you where it's mapped to, and that will change if you change the start key. That will change as well. The only difference with this mode is that you don't get the MIDI region mapped, but it is a quick and easy way to slice the samples. Another way of doing that, and this time if we wanted a MIDI region along with the samples, if we drag it into the drum machine designer, this will now give us our mapped region like we saw earlier on, and is loaded each slice into the drum machine designer, And furthermore, you can see that mapped across different tracks. So there's three ways of importing and quickly sampling an audio file. Logic 10.5 has two samplers available. The replacement for the ESX24, which is called Sampler, and the new Quick Sampler. If I was to take my loop and drag it into the track header, I would load the Quick Sampler. If I was to, as I did earlier on, take the loop and to convert regions to a new sampler track, that then would load the ESX24 replacement, which is now called Sampler. Let's take a look inside the newly created Sampler instrument with the goal of exploring the creative potential offered by the sampler. So in the inspector, double click Sampler to open the interface. The sampler parameter window opens with the newly created sampler instrument, and you can see at the top the different modular elements of the sampler. To save screen real estate, let's turn off everything here except for mapping and make that full window. And you can see each of the samples mapped onto one key. You can of course extend the zone range to map the audio file to multiple pitches, either by changing the settings in the key range column or by simply dragging like so. I'll just use the lower sample. The pitch and speed of the sample shifts up and down, mapped in relation to your MIDI keyboard input. Of course, if you wanted to turn off the pitch, you can by just clicking this pitch function here. If I needed to change the sample area, I go to zone, and I can see my sample represented here because it's selected. If I move on to the next one, it will show that one. So let's go back to the first one, and here I can quickly edit the start and end point, and now on C1 it will play that region like so. Looping is a technique that stems from the days when samplers had tiny memory stores, by today's standard anyway, in which to load samples. Many sounds start off with complex attacks but soon settle into a more or less settled waveform. By repeating this settled area, a sample can be sustained indefinitely without using up limited memory space. Even with modern software samplers that have access to gigabytes of memory, looping is a useful technique to create sustaining sounds out of samples that are otherwise quite short. If we wanted to loop our drum kit, first of all we would find the start point, which we already know, and the end point. So I'm going to drag this to about halfway and have a listen. Okay, that's not bad. I can always edit it quite easily here. Now I'm going to go down to the mode here, and I'm going to turn the loop function on, and we see this loop function here. And now I'm just going to drag the left end point out to the end, and now when I press my key it should loop. Little bit of a clip on the end so I can move it if I needed to. Now let's have a look at some of the filtering capabilities in the sampler. And we start off by turning on synth, and we bring up this window here. So for those of you who haven't already watched it, I would advise you to watch my video on synthesis with the ES2 synthesizer, and that would really help you to understand some of what's going on here. Basically we have pitch, fine tune in sense, and we have two filters. So filter 1, there's different types of low pass, band pass and high pass filters here. Cutoff, resonant frequency, which boosts the frequencies around the cutoff, and drive. Here we have a second filter, and we have, I'm going to turn that off and have a listen to the second filter. And here we have a filter blend between the two. We have series and parallel. So let's put them in parallel. Turn that one on. Filter 1, filter 2. The heart of the modulation section is the modulation matrix. Like a virtual patch bay, it routes all modulation from source to target. And to better explain how this works, let's have a go at using it. And please watch my video on the ES2 synthesizer. But here you can see that each slot in the modulation router has an assignable target, source and amount or intensity, and a via parameter. So the target parameter represents values that will be changed dynamically. So in here we'll control the filter 1 cutoff, and that is being modified by the low frequency oscillator. So if I play a key, and we'll be able to see that working as well. If we open synth, we'll be able to see in the mapping area. You can also assign zones into groups to apply common parameters to multiple zones simultaneously. Groups contain many of the same parameters you use in zones, but they also offer some unique parameters. For example, you can offset both the filter settings and the envelopes, which allows you to create different cutoff and resonant values for different zones. In this sampler instrument example I created, the low pass filter cut out all of the high frequencies of all samples. By using groups, you can in effect apply a different cutoff frequency for just the snare hits. In the mapping area, go to group, new group, and you can select the samples that you want and go Command C to copy, go into your group and Command V to paste, or you can select all, hold down Option, drag the samples across, create a group that way. You can of course rename the groups by double clicking, and this is your group view function here. The sampler allows you to further process sounds by placing plugins into the signal chain. When you do so, the entire sample signal is processed. Although processing the entire signal normally isn't a problem, in some instances you may want to apply separate processing to individual zones in a sampler instrument. To do so, you need to isolate the zone or group onto its own mixer channel for individual processing. Fortunately, the sampler allows you to route individual sounds through separate virtual outputs to accomplish that. These routings are selected by the output menu in the mixer parameters in either the zones or the group parameters. To demonstrate this, what I've done is I've taken my loop and I've dragged all of the kick drums into a new group called kick. To do that, all I did is I went to group, new, named it kick, and then simply went to my loop and dragged them in like so. I found a very useful thing that if I clicked on the loop and then shift clicked on kick, I could see where the overlaps were, so I could see which ones I dragged. And I just need to put those, let me just put those back to there, delete my new kick, so I could see where they were overlapped. Can you see? So I'd click loop, shift click kick, and I could see there was an overlap, and then what I did was to go to kick, solo it and play. And do the same for loop just to check. See, I can hear that I'm missing a couple of kicks, but for the time being I'll just take kick, click on kick, and we can see here that the output is main output, and here the loop, the output is main output. So in order for us to get multiple outputs, I'm going to go back to the inspector, open the inspector, and in my sampler just go over to the right, click where you have the up and down arrow, sampler, and I'm going to choose multiple or multi-output. And when I choose multi-output, now I'm able to click on kick, output, change from main to 3 to 4. So now that's being outputted through 3 and 4, and the rest of the loop's going out through the main output. Close my sampler, open up my mixer by pressing X, and here on my sample track, it doesn't show up in the inspector for some reason, but in the sample track here I get a plus and a minus. So if I hit plus, you can see that the input is 3 and 4. So now I should hear it muted. I had it muted. And of course now I can add EQ, effects, the processing, and so on.